Well, perhaps the best sign that this is, in fact, a big story is that the establishment press has almost uniformly moved to her defense. We'll have more on Rice and the media in just a minute. But first, Congressman Brad Sherman of California has spent years as a champion of civil liberties. He voted against the Patriot Act, against warrantless wiretapping, against bulk data collection. So far, he has not yet commented on Rice's behavior. He joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
I do want to differ with you on one thing. When you use the term monitored, you make it sound like Trump's people were the target. You know, if Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, orders a pizza, they're going to listen to the pepperoni guy.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're monitoring Papa John's.
Well, they were actually monitoring Trump's associates. Whether they were the intended target of it or not is an open question. But as you know, the law allows the U.S. government to monitor American citizens when they are speaking with people from foreign countries. Again, intent is all that is up for debate, not the fact of the monitoring. But my question...
Well, the word monitoring is a little unclear. The person being monitored is the Russian ambassador or the Russian officials. Obviously, if they're talking to an American, they're going to capture
that
the voice of the
person's
American.
not being monitored. So if that person wasn't being monitored, then why would Susan Rice be interested in the identity of that person?
Well, you want to understand what Kislyak has to say.
The person who's not being monitored. You want to know who that person is?
Yes, because first of all, the unmasking is not just, the unmasking may not have anything to do with the voice of the American. If Kislyak is talking to Moscow about Flynn, and you want to know what is he talking about?
Right.
Which official do they think they can manipulate?
Right.
Which official do they think is really smart?
I understand.
You want to know what they think.
Right, because you're
That's
monitoring that person.
No,
you're not monitoring that person, but his identity is key to understing what you're monitoring.
Exactly.
But do you see the Orwellian path we're now trotting? You're saying these people are not actually being surveilled, but they're literally being surveilled.
If Kislyak is talking to the Kremlin about an American, the American may be asleep at the time. That's monitoring what Kislyak has to say.
But in this case, the American wasn't asleep. The American was speaking. We know in at least one case. We do, actually. We know in the case of General Mike Flynn, who was speaking, that he was monitored. And he's an American citizen.
He was talking to the Russian ambassador.
Look, you can describe the motive or try and justify it, but it doesn't change the fact that he was monitored by his government without a warrant and without his knowledge. And so
look, when I talk to the Russian ambassador, I expect I'm being monitored. And if the Russian ambassador is having conversations that the CIA and FBI aren't monitoring, then why in the hell are we giving them billions of dollars?
My question, that's a separate question, the oversight of the intelligence community. But the Fourth Amendment seems to say that Americans should be immune from monitoring or surveillance or spying or whatever the term we're using without a warrant. And you went to Harvard Law School. Why is the Fourth Amendment suspended when I'm speaking to someone from a foreign country? I don't understand that.
Well, it's relatively impossible to listen to half the conversation.
Right.
If you're going, it is entirely appropriate to monitor what the Russian ambassador is doing. And if I'm on the phone with them or you're on the phone with them, they're going to hear both sides of that conversation.
So that doesn't raise any Fourth Amendment concerns for you at all?
It clearly doesn't.
Okay. So you said that when you speak to people in foreign countries, you have the expectation that you're being spied upon, monitored, surveilled, whatever, by the U.S. government, that your voice is being picked up. Hillary Clinton and her foundation staff, we know from press reports, spoke to a lot of foreign leaders who, not all of whom are allies of the United States, to put it mildly. So the expectation in that case would be those conversations were picked up by the U.S. government. What happened to them? Do you know? Do you know where
they haven't been leaked by the Trump administration.
Right.
One would expect that there are hundreds of thousands of pages worth of information collected every day, and that Hillary's name has been in them since the 90s, because the Russians have been talking to each other about Bill and Hillary Clinton since the 90s.
Okay, so this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you specifically, because I think you have been a pretty assertive voice for privacy on behalf of American citizens against their government, and yet you seem to have suspended your normal suspicion in this case because it pertains to the Trump administration and Russia.
No, I think that we've been picking up what the Russians communicate back to the Kremlin all the time. And that invariably involves American names. And one would expect that the Kremlin is talking about President Clinton, then President Bush, then President Obama all the time.
But see, what bothers me is we don't know, and as far as I know, you don't know the purpose, specifically the purpose for this surveillance. And as you know, it is not uncommon for intelligence agencies to reverse it. I want to spy on you. I can't legally, so I find out who you're speaking to abroad, and I spy on them, and thereby pick up your half of the conversation. That happens, as you well know. Would you sponsor legislation requiring intelligence agencies to explain the purpose of this surveillance before engaging in it?
When they're going to get a FISA warrant, they need to explain it. But if you are monitoring foreign officials, that's their job, especially if we're talking about hostile foreign officials, such as China and Russia.
But shouldn't they explain it? I mean, so here you have...
Yeah, I mean, there's one sentence explanation. Russia's hostile to the United States, and we're keeping track.
How about in this sense? So our government is basically ground to a halt. Our relations with a key country in the world, Russia, are on edge as the result of an investigation we know literally nothing about. We don't know its conclusions. We don't really know with any specificity its purpose. And yet all of us are proceeding as if this is normal. Why is that normal?
We need an independent investigation of whether Russia colluded with Trump to hack Hillary.
Okay.
Now, I think the first part of that has already been proven, that Russia did it. I know you disagree.
Did what exactly?
Did the hacking of the DNC and Podesta emails. Now,
is there evidence of that anywhere? I mean, have you seen, as a member of Congress and someone who's well-versed on intelligence matters, have you seen any evidence? And I know that you're skeptical of the intelligence agency. They've spied on Congress before and not been punished. Have you seen any evidence that that's true?
I may not be quite as skeptical as you. When I see Comey and Clapper and Coates all agree, all of them first appointed by Republican presidents, that conclusion is something that I'm willing to accept, because they're not going to give me, let alone anyone outside of Congress, the sources, methods, and details.
Did you read the January 6th Intelligence Community Report on Russian spying? I'm sure that you did. Okay, so it said two things that kind of got lost in the noise. The first was, that I'm quoting now, we did not make an assessment of the impact that Russian activities had on the outcome of the 2016 election.
They're not. I'm more qualified, you're more qualified to make that assessment. We follow politics.
But here's the second one. Judgments are not intended to imply that we have proof that shows something to be a fact. Judgments are not intended to imply that we have proof that shows something to be a fact. Now, we're operating, you are operating, all of Washington is operating on the assumption that we know for certain that the Russian government hacked those two email accounts, the DNC's and Podesta's. And to this moment, not only is there no evidence, but the intel community itself says we don't necessarily have proof.
That was January. They've made
What has changed? I have not seen
gathering more information.
But why? Look, people's lives are being changed. Their reputation's impugned. You saw a member of the Democratic member of the Intel Committee today, Joaquin Castro, say he expects people to go to jail. People are being threatened with imprisonment, and there's still no evidence available for public view or even your view. Why?
Well, the only person who's being impugned is Putin, and he's got many things to be impugned for. No American has been identified as engaging in any illegal behavior.
Are you kidding? Do you watch television every single day? People who work for Trump? And by the way, I don't know if Paul Manafort, I don't know anything about Paul Manafort. I'm merely saying these guys are being held up as Russian agents who changed the outcome of the election. And isn't it incumbent upon elected officials and the agencies to provide some proof that they did something wrong?
We need an investigation. There's no proof that any American did anything wrong.
I thought there was an investigation ongoing.
The FBI is conducting an investigation. I have, and I know you have, some concerns about Comey. I would like to see a special prosecutor or special counsel do that investigation from a Justice Department office, and we ought to also have an independent commission. This is important for us to know. We do know this. Emails were hacked, and they were significant. They were much more significant than the files stolen from the Democratic National Headquarters back in Watergate. Those we know didn't affect the election in any significant way. Right. McGovern lost in a landslide.
We're out of time. I mean, I'd love to hear someone argue point blank that voters shouldn't have known that information. I was glad to know it before I voted.
You can beat any candidate if you can publish everything on their email.
All right.
And I'm sure that if Bernie voters knew what Hillary really thought of Bernie's hairstyle, we would have lost even more votes. That kind of personal chit-chat should not be published.
Congressman Sherman, thanks for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you.
Well, there's something at the last election that seems to have driven otherwise rational people into dark and embarrassing places. Barack Obama's twin electoral victories are supposed to have changed everything and put an end to the paranoid style of American politics. Obama was touted as living proof, as he himself often noted, that the arc of history bends towards something awesome, likely the permanent triumph of establishment liberalism, and almost everyone in Washington actually believed this was true. And then Hillary Clinton lost, proving that the rest of the country never really bought into that program. What a shock it was, and D.C. has still not recovered from it. The result, hysteria like we haven't seen here since the 1950s. Suddenly, no conspiracy is too nutty to be taken seriously as long as it pertains to Russia. No act is too improper to be excused as long as it was supposedly meant to stop Russia. Extremism in the fight against Putin is no vice, suddenly. Well, the contortions can make your head spin. Just a month ago, the media told us it was absurd to say the Trump administration was spied on Trump, rather Obama spied on Trump. Now they're saying it would be absurd not to spy on Trump. Susan Rice's decision to unmask her political enemies, far from a crime, they're now telling us, it was routine and necessary. Well, at this point, there are at least two key questions that remain unanswered in this saga. First, did Susan Rice include the unmasked names in her presidential daily briefs for the president, President Obama? And second, did Rice or her associates leak those names to the press? Either one would be a stunning misuse of the national security apparatus. It ought to be the media's job to discover if any of that happened. But instead, they're flamboyantly not interested. Jim Sciutto, for example, CNN's chief national security correspondent, told viewers yesterday the Susan Rice story was, quote, ginned up by the right wing as, quote, a distraction. Well, of course, until 2013, Sciutto was a political appointee working for the Obama administration. He has every reason to defend his former co-workers, no matter what they do. The question is, why did CNN put him on this beat in the first place? But next, undeterred, CNN rolled out his breaking news banner to proclaim, brace yourself, that a friend of Susan Rice's had denied on background she did anything wrong. That was news. Meanwhile, anchor Don Lemon announced he wouldn't, quote, insult the intelligence of his viewers by talking about the Rice story at all. Instead, the channel is entirely committed to covering Trump's collusion with Russia, even though there remains precisely no evidence such a thing actually happened, and so on. You've seen it. It's not news coverage. It is mass delusion, and someday Washington is going to wake up from all of this hungover and ashamed. Well, CNN is not the only news network behaving this way. Up next, we'll talk about how the press seems to determine to pretend the Susan Rice story is not happening. Also, Ivanka Trump says she supports equal pay for women. That's intolerable for people who don't want to agree with her on anything. The panel ahead. It's about how far the federal government is willing to go for the sake of a political agenda. It looks like they went pretty far this time. But you wouldn't know any of that from the American media, which seems eager to pretend this story does not exist at all.
There is no evidence that backs up the president's original claim. And on this program tonight, we will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, nor will we aid and abet the people who are trying to misinform you, the American people, by creating a diversion.
However, Rice did not spread the information, according to this former official who insisted that there was nothing improper or political involved.
Now, there's nothing illegal or improper or even unexpected about a national security advisor unmasking those names.
This appears to be a story largely ginned up, partly as a distraction from this larger investigation.
So they call Susan Rice's college roommate. She gives her a pass, so everything's fine. Mark Steyn is an author, commentator, frequently a fill-in host for Rush Limbaugh. You've heard him there, and he joins us tonight. Mark, are you satisfied this is merely a distraction from the fervid swamps of right-wing media?
Yeah, the media is basically annoyed because this is a distraction from their distraction about the collusion between Russia and Trump. I mean, the most interesting thing to me about all this is that Susan Rice has apparently, as a practical matter, been surveilling Trump associates for a year, which basically means since New Hampshire and Iowa, which seems to me a very odd thing for a national security advisor to be doing. And you can bet that if in that time they had found any kind of meaningful collusion between Trump and the Russians, it would have been leaked by now. And it hasn't been leaked because it doesn't exist.
Have you noticed how the boundary markers have changed? So last night on CNN, Don Lemon, I don't mean to pick on, I kind of like Don Lemon, but he said this, I'm quoting, let's be very clear about this. There is no evidence whatsoever that the Trump team was spied on illegally. Which is kind of a big change. A month ago, it's totally false. They were not spied upon. Now they weren't spied upon legally.
No, no, no. And that's the distinction. We all know that under the national security state, we can all of us be spied on at all times. And the FISA court is not a very great protection against that. And so in a sense, it depends on normal codes and conventions that would stop this from happening. And you flip it around, Tucker. Imagine if in the last year of the Bush administration, the Bush National Security Advisor had been surveilling members of Obama's inner circle. Do you think Don Lemon would be quite so sanguine about the fact that that's all hunky-dory and perfectly legal?
I certainly wouldn't defend it. I don't think I would defend it, actually. No. What I find so striking is the press has jumped on Trump, in some cases fairly, for not providing evidence to support his claims. And yet, you're seeing in the last couple of days, the press makes claims that are every bit as unsupported. This morning on CNN, Chris Cuomo described this as the fake Susan Rice scandal. We don't know that. There's a lot we don't know. Why the suspension of curiosity all of a sudden? They don't seem like they want to know.
No, and I think, as you said at the top of the show, Tucker, the biggest clue that this is a real story is the fact that so many media institutions don't want to cover it at all. And what they have to cover instead is really very thin gruel. Someone who happens to be the brother of a minor cabinet secretary met a Russian in the Four Seasons in the Seychelles after the election. Wow, hold the front page for that. My daughter, my little girl, met Trump last year, and next month she's going to be in St. Petersburg where she'll be meeting some Russians. So I certainly hope the NSA will manage to surveil her, because St. Petersburg is a pretty dangerous place at the moment, and I'd be reassured to know she's under 24/7 surveillance because she met Trump and she soon happens to be meeting some Russians. This stuff is, that's the fake news. They're annoyed, in a sense, in that someone has managed to outfake their own fake news with the fake Susan Rice story. That's what they're complaining about.
Nicely put. Mark Steyn, it is great to see you as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Up next, just 2 weeks ago, Susan Rice said she knew nothing about surveillance of the Trump team. It turns out that was just the latest time she said something that's not true. Well, the revelation that Susan Rice played a key role in the surveillance of President Trump's transition team is all the more appalling because just 2 weeks ago, Rice told PBS she knew nothing about it. Imagine that, a former government official just going on television and telling lies. Unbelievable, but perhaps we should not be surprised. Susan Rice has a history of saying things that, to speak technically for a moment, are not true. Here are a couple.
What sparked the recent violence was the airing on the internet of a very hateful, very offensive video that has offended many people around the world. The point is that he's back. He's going to be safely reunited with his family. He served the United States with honor and distinction. I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Yunus on that count today.
So she's political, and she's been caught lying a lot. Nevertheless, a lot of people in Washington are eager to justify Susan Rice's actions. Max Boot is a foreign policy analyst and military historian. He joins us tonight. Max, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So why wouldn't we be concerned that a political appointee with a history of lying for political reasons had access to this information and did something unusual with it? She unmasked the names of her political opponents.
Well, Tucker, as you know, I am a lifelong Republican. I was an advisor to Mitt Romney and John McCain.
Right.
I spent 8 years castigating the feckless foreign policy of the Obama administration. So I am no Susan Rice defender. I am certainly no defender of the Obama administration. If they did something wrong, they should certainly be exposed. My concern is that we have not seen credible evidence so far of wrongdoing, and my real concern is that this is largely a smokescreen concocted by the White House to distract attention from the undeniable scandal of the fact that the Russian intelligence services intervened in our election last year to hurt Hillary Clinton and to elect Donald Trump. And the FBI, as you know, is now investigating whether there was collusion between the president and his senior aides and a hostile foreign intelligence service. This is unprecedented. This is a major scandal. We need to get to the bottom of this. We need an independent commission. We need a special counsel. And by all means, let's throw in all these allegations that Trump is throwing out there against Susan Rice and the Obama White House. Put it all.
I mean, I don't actually think this is about Trump, and I know you don't care for Trump, and that's legitimate, and you disagree with his views. Fine, lots of people do. But independent and apart from Trump, and independent apart even from your political views, we have a very political national security advisor doing something that violated the privacy of American citizens without a warrant. It shouldn't have been done. Now, maybe you could argue it's legal, but lots of things are legal that are wrong. Are you really comfortable with this? Would you be comfortable with the Trump people doing this?
I haven't seen any evidence that what the Obama administration did was illegal or improper. If they in fact did so, I think by all means we should investigate. Tucker, would you join with me right now in calling for a bipartisan 9/11 style commission or a special counsel to get to the bottom of this whole thing? Not only the charges against Donald Trump, but also the charges that are being made against the Obama administration.
Yeah, Yes, I mean, look, you're arguing process here, as everybody does.
No, this is not process. We've got to get to the bottom of this.
Here we have had an FBI investigation going on apparently since last spring into the question, did the Trump campaign collude with the Russians?
Right.
We've seen a ton of leaks. We've seen a lot of allegations. And what we've seen so far is literally zero evidence that such an arrangement was reached between the Trump people and the Russians. But it hasn't stopped the hyperventilating. And I think it's weird.
Tucker, there's been a lot of suspicious things, including the fact that you've had prominent Trump officials like Attorney General Jeff Sessions lying about his meetings with the Russian ambassador. You had Mike Flynn, the first national security advisor, lying about his meetings with the Russians. And by the way, Mike Flynn is now asking for immunity from prosecution. As Donald Trump himself says, if you haven't committed a crime, why do you need immunity?
I'm not here to defend Mike Flynn, who I think should not have been taking money from the Turkish government. Okay.
Exactly.
But here's what makes it really unhelpful. So you wrote an LA Times column this morning, and you said, with total confidence, I'm quoting you now, Trump was elected with the help of a hostile foreign power.
Right.
There's literally no evidence that that's true. And if you have a sober commitment to finding out the truth, which I assume you would, that's not helpful to make allegations you can't support.
Tucker, let me read to you from the consensus estimate released by the U.S. intelligence community, including the FBI, including the CIA, including the Director of National Intelligence in January, where they said, we assess Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. We also assess Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. That is the consensus product of the U.S. intelligence community.
Hold on. I've read the report. In fact, I just reread it a minute ago. And that's not what you allege. You said he was elected with the help of a hostile foreign power. Now, I'll read your quote and
the Russians tried to help him get elected.
From exactly the same report. We did not make an assessment of the impact that Russian activities had on the outcome of the election. And you're saying that you know that somehow the Russians got this guy elected. And I'm merely saying that's a fever dream unsupported by evidence.
No,
unless you know something we don't.
Let's be accurate here, Tucker. I'm not saying that the Russian interference was the only thing that got Donald Trump elected. But remember,
you said with the help of.
Yes, because in fact,
what are you talking
Donald
about?
Trump was elected, Tucker, as you know, by 70,000 votes in 3 states. It was a very close election. Almost every day of the last month of the campaign, Donald Trump on the campaign trail mentioned WikiLeaks, which is a Russian intelligence front used for disseminating information that was stolen by Russian intelligence from DNC and Podesta emails. So if the Russian leak had no impact on the election, why was Donald Trump so eager to talk about it? Clearly, it had an impact. I'm not saying it was decisive, but clearly it had an impact along with a number of other factors. And that should alarm us because that goes to the very integrity of our electoral process, which has now been called into question.
So your point is that information that was secret was revealed. It shouldn't have been revealed, and it unduly influenced voters in their voting. I think that's what you're saying. And my
point is that the Russians stole emails and other information from the Democrats and then weaponized that information to try to influence the outcome of the election.
And convinced Americans with facts that they should be voting for Donald Trump rather than Hillary Clinton. And I guess I'd ask the question of you that I've asked of many. If you could go back, would you remove those facts from the public conversation, keep them from voters, so they could make their decisions in the ballot box without knowing what they knew?
You know, those are pretty selective facts, Tucker. The intelligence
it's a simple question. Should people not have known that?
No, the intelligence community has also said that the Russians...
They were emails. What are you talking about?
Let me finish my sentence if I could, Tucker.
Yes.
The intelligence community has also said that the Russians broke into Republican accounts, but they didn't share those results. If they were going to share the results of ransacking Democratic emails, to make it fair, they ought to be sharing the results of ransacking Republican emails. Because I bet there was a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in your email and my email and Donald Trump's email which should not necessarily be public.
I'm not advocating for the burglary of emails. I'm merely saying...
Which is something that Donald Trump was advocating for.
NBC shot video of the guy without his knowledge and taped him, then leaked it to the Washington Post. Should that not have been in the public sphere? I mean, that influenced a ton of votes. Are you saying we shouldn't have seen the Access Hollywood video? I mean, look, the point is, as a voter, I want as much information as I can have, and you're saying I should have less.
Tucker, there was a concerted effort by a hostile foreign country, Russia, to influence the outcome of our election. This is not business as usual. This is something that is very nefarious and that is threatening to our democracy. And we need to get to the bottom of it. And I'm glad to hear you agree that we need an independent investigation because we have to get the facts.
Where do you get these talking points? Are all you guys on a call in the morning or something where you think of the 9 lines to repeat on TV at night?
I'm not on a talking point with anybody, Tucker. I'm a lifelong Republican. I've always voted for Republicans my whole life.
Only your logic. Max, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
Up next, a former White House aide says the entire Rice story is a smokescreen to protect the president. Is it really? He'll be here to make his case. Stay tuned. Welcome back. First, both Democrats and Republicans seem eager to ridicule President Trump's claim, that he was spied on by the Obama administration. Suddenly, that is no longer the case. Today, Senators John Cornyn, Lindsey Graham, and Rand Paul, Republicans all of whom have had feuds with Trump, called for a congressional investigation of Susan Rice's behavior when she was in the Obama White House. Here's part of what they said.
I believe Susan Rice abused this system, and she did it for political purposes. She needs to be brought in and questioned under oath.
Well, I believe she should be called as a witness by the Senate Intelligence Committee.
It's something Congress should look into. If she was involved in unmasking Trump transition figures, what was the reason, and was there a political motive? I'd like to know that, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
Of course, if the surveillance story suddenly is bringing Republicans to Trump's defense, then it must not be worthy of coverage anymore. This morning, Democratic strategist and former White House aide David Goodfriend said this on Fox News. Watch.
Yesterday, my friend Tucker Carlson, and I want you to know this, I like Tucker. I've been on his show. But I'm sorry, he's turning into a high-paid smokescreen salesman for the Trump White House. He's trying to obfuscate and distract you from the real news yesterday.
Oh, fighting words. Why don't you come say that to my face, David Goodfriend? Oh, wait, here he is. David Goodfriend joins us on the set. So, David, why am I the civil libertarian here? As a lifelong conservative, why am I the one worried about the privacy rights of Americans? I thought that was supposed to be a liberal obsession. I don't know any liberals who care anymore.
Actually, if we talk about Edward Snowden and the revelations that he made about NSA spying on individuals, that brought together people on the far left and the far right into saying that was too much invasion by the state. And I, for one, I'd love to see you support this as well. I'd like to see no reauthorization of the Patriot Act and any of its surveillance methods whatsoever.
Now you're getting abstract. Let's get precise. We know that a political appointee, Susan Rice, one of the former president's closest political advisors, requested the names of Americans and monitored members of Trump's entourage, in effect, for months, many months, going back to the Republican primaries. And it's not really clear why, but we know that her behavior was unusual. It doesn't make you uncomfortable at all?
So I assume this is why you want me to explain why I called you a smokescreen salesman for the Trump president,
I basically had the same conversation yesterday. Look, I don't take it personally.
Your previous guest who came on before me, Max Boot, lifelong Republican, somebody who said he opposed
whatever.
Obama.
I'm not even talking about politics. I'm just talking about as an American that doesn't bother. I'm not attacking Max Boot. I'm merely saying I don't care what his political affiliation is. I'm saying as an American, you're not bothered.
Sure, I'm bothered. I'm bothered by our country being compromised by a #1 foreign adversary in collusion with our president. That bothers me. And what Max Boot said to you, let me finish here, Tucker. The reason I took a hit at you this morning on Fox News and said you're putting up a smokescreen is because yesterday, or rather April 2nd, right when the Washington Post was going to come out with its story about the meeting between Trump people and Russians, that was when we decided to hear all about Susan Rice and the character assassination started. You seem to think that if you can distract your audience, and you've got an intelligent audience, you can distract them with talking about Susan Rice. I want to talk about Russia. I want to talk about the compromising of our system.
I'm not a political consultant.
Aren't you upset by that?
Slow down. I'm not a political consultant. I don't take orders from the White House. I haven't received a single piece of information from the White House. I get my information from people at lunch and the Washington Post. When this story came out, I'm sure it was leaked by people with political interest in leaking it. It doesn't change the facts of the story. And the facts of the story remain exactly what they were.
With the Trump people?
These are two separate strands.
Oh, I think they
one
fit
does
together
not
very
preclude
nicely.
the other. Here you have a political actor in a White House surveilling her political opponents.
Wrong.
It's not wrong.
It's
it was
wrong.
Admitted to by Susan Rice on television today.
So
that doesn't bother you at all. No, because it's not.
No, look,
it's not.
I just
somehow
got done
hurting
saying
Trump.
to you that we ought to get rid of the Patriot Act. Of course, that's
the Patriot Act. I'm not talking about the Patriot Act.
It absolutely stems from the same statute. Now, listen to me, Tucker.
I'm worried about you guys. You made a statement this morning on TV that was
you don't seem to worry about the big story here.
Here's the big story. Hold on. Here's the big story as you described it. This is what you said this morning to Shannon Bream on Fox.
Yes, I saw the clip.
You said, no, here's another one. You said, we now know that a representative from the Trump camp met a representative of the Russian government in the Seychelles. Eric Prince, exactly right.
The brother of
I got it. I know where Eric Prince
Secretary.
is. You said, as of yesterday, the connection between the Russians and the Trump campaign has now been proven.
Yes.
That was long after Trump already won. So your basic claim that Trump colluded with the Russian government to win the presidency remains not only unproven but lacking any evidence at all. So maybe you should slow down before making that claim.
Oh, Tucker, now listen. We have an ongoing criminal investigation by the FBI.
Do you have any evidence or not?
We have an ongoing...
Do you have any evidence or not?
I'm not
even
an FBI talker.
Like this.
And as a matter of fact, yes, when you have the head of
Where's
the
the
Senate...
evidence?
The head... Okay, this is... I've seen you do this on the show before.
No, because no one ever answers my question. That's why.
Talk to... You just berated a Republican guest who said we've got 17 national security...
I don't care what your political affiliation is. If you're going to say things without any evidence at all, I'm going to press you.
Tucker, you can actually ask and bring on the show Senator Mark Warner. Why don't you bring on the show James Comey?
I've had a parade of senators, and not one person can answer that question. And look, we may find out in a year's time that Trump and Putin were taking saunas every afternoon or chatting on their cell phones.
That's a troubling
But as of now, we know nothing to that effect. And so let's stop making allegations we can't support.
You're contradicting yourself. You're contradicting yourself.
I am not.
You have spent the entire day berating Susan Rice.
Who admitted
you have no evidence yourself about her.
She admitted on television today that she was involved in surveillance of the Trump campaign.
Look, suppose she got a transmission.
But that's cool now because it's anti-Trump.
No.
People have gone insane. I'm being told I have to stop.
Two sides of your mouth.
There's only one side. David, I'm cutting off because we're out of time, I'm being told. Thank you for joining us. Up next, Ivanka Trump, Rachel Dolezal, Elizabeth Warren are all women making news. Our panel of ladies will explain what ties these threads together. Stay tuned. So have you heard this one? A fake Native American, a fake black woman, and the billionaire daughter of a president walk into a bar. It's not clear what the punchline is, but you can't go wrong with that setup. Elizabeth Warren, Rachel Dolezal, and Ivanka Trump are all in the news today. Why are these three making headlines? Joining us to explain, Katie Pavlich, she's an editor at Town Hall, and Madison Gazotto, who is with the Washington Times. They both join us. I'll admit I've been so deep in this Russia thing, spying on behalf of Putin and creating smokescreens, that I missed a lot of the news. Katie, what have we missed?
Well, the first thing is that it is equal pay day. And although the Equal Pay Act has been in law for 50 years, Ivanka Trump's tweeting about how we have a pay gap, that women only make 82% of what men make. Not necessarily true, but while conservative women responded politely, feminists who actually agree with her policies were protesting her on Twitter in these social media posts. The Socialist Party weighed in and said, quote, waged work is wage slavery, whatever that means. I'm not sure, but the point is that even though she falls to the left of the issue, is their voice inside the White House on equal pay, they're still protesting her even though they agree.
They're mad that they agree. How does Elizabeth Warren play into this?
Well, Elizabeth Warren, of course, is always preaching to conservatives and Republicans about how they're not equally treating women, how they're anti-women, there's a war on women. And yet, according to the Senate data statistics, Elizabeth Warren paid her female staffers 30% less than her male staffers in 2016, which amounts to $20,000 less for women. So not practicing what she preaches.
Elizabeth Warren, a champion for women, actually doesn't care about women enough to pay them.
She's not a champion for women.
That's unbelievable. Wow, you blow my mind. Madison?
Okay.
Your turn.
So 2015, remember Rachel Dolezal?
Yes.
Blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman passed herself off as black for years. She, gets approached. They ask, are you African American? She says she doesn't understand the question. Her parents out her. That's the end of it, right? Wrong.
I remember.
Wrong.
Oh.
She's back. So she writes a book. She goes on CNN, MSNBC. She claims to be trans black. She says race is nothing more than a social construct. You can just choose it. So if I wake up tomorrow and feeling Chinese, that means I'm Chinese. I should be addressed as such. So what's crazier about this is CNN and MSNBC are spending like a lot of airtime talking about it. So Don Lemon has on Montel Williams. He says, because Rachel Dolezal's white parents adopted black children, Rachel Dolezal married a black man, and she picked out a black Raggedy Ann doll as a child. That means that maybe this is true. I said, I had a Mulan doll when I was little. I did not grow up to be Mulan. I am still Italian. I'm not Mulan. I'm not Chinese. So either this lady's absolutely crazy and needs mental help, or she's a con artist, which is what Montel Williams is claiming. Like him, I'm not buying it. It's crazy, and I think quite insulting.
But CNN is taking this dead. And by the way, why not? Boy, I mean, the new rule is you are what you say you are, and anyone who disagrees with you is a bigot and should be fired. So, like, why is that so crazy?
Doesn't make it true, though.
Doesn't make it true. Isn't that cultural appropriation? I mean, there's all these arguments that you can't have dreadlocks now if you're a white person because it's cultural appropriation.
Unless you're Rachel Dolezal.
Right, unless you're Dolezal, and then you can be trans black, and it's acceptable.
She's got a lot of guts, I will say that. Thank you both. Thanks for filling us in on the stuff we missed.
You're welcome.
We're deep into the Kremlin. Madison, Katie, thanks. Well, in 2008, at the height of the financial crisis, the federal government placed both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac under full federal control. That federal takeover may have been the last you heard about either company, which are designed to increase home ownership, but both remain major enterprises overseeing trillions of dollars in mortgage assets. What happened next? Josh Rosner is managing director at Graham Fisher & Company. He says the federal government is in fact looting both companies, using the assets of their investors to fund programs like Obamacare, while the rest of us weren't paying attention. Josh Rosner joins us now. Josh, that's amazing if true. So the federal government, while the rest of us were, I don't know, reading stories about the Kremlin, is looting Fannie and Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that we can go from a razzmatazz story of allegations to an actually factually based story of a simple theft. Essentially, in 2012, to avoid dealing with the Republicans on the debt ceiling, on sequester, and to fund Obamacare, the Obama administration took Fannie and Freddie's profits going forward at the point where they were about to become profitable again, have now taken hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't know where that money has gone specifically, but we do know what the purpose was. There's been no accounting, and then the government, to cover its tracks for having come up with this scheme, frankly, to avoid tax and spend clause, ends up claiming executive privilege on over 11,000 documents that they won't unseal. And frankly, until we see those documents, we're not really going to know the cost of Obamacare. We're not really going to know where that money went, and we shouldn't even be thinking about what we do on housing finance reform.
So, I mean, you're fairly certain, though, that some of this money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac wound up funding Obamacare or filling shortfalls?
Correct. And, that's one of the things that happens. So on a quarterly basis, when the GSEs are profitable, the government takes all of their earnings, puts it into the general treasury funds. They're not considered part of the budget for appropriations purpose. There's been no accounting of what happened to those funds, where they went. And again, the government has claimed executive privilege. Now, keep in mind, these aren't issues of national security. So why they would claim executive privilege on 11,000 documents when most of the people who were involved in the Obama administration, White House and Treasury in doing this are now working for big banks, too big to fail banks, not even big, big banks, the too big to fail banks, and really pushing for a model that would essentially put the community banks out of business, underspend on affordable housing or increasing home ownership, and supporting the too big to fail banks.
Why would they exert executive privilege when it's illegitimate? Because they can, because they have all the guns.
That's right. And so this administration really has an opportunity to expose what is a clear, simple, and straightforward scandal, and just let those 11,000 documents out. The public has a right to see those.
Thank you for telling us this existed. I don't think most people had any idea. Josh, thanks.
Thank you.